Hey there, everybody, and welcome to episode number 2 of Games with Writers. And today we're talking with author Eva Seyler. She is the author of an upcoming book on World War I, one of my favorite topics, which is one reason why caught my eye. A little bit about Eva. She was born in Jacksonville, Florida, and she left that humidity pit at the age of 3 and spent the next 21 years in California, Idaho, Kentucky, and Washington, before ending up in Oregon, where she now lives on a homestead in the western foothills with her husband and 5 children, 2 of whom are human. So let's welcome Eva. Eva, how are you doing? Good, good. So I want to get started talking about your book. Now, it's World War I. That's the setting for the book. Am I right on that? Have you always had a deep interest in that time period, or is it something relatively new for you, or how did that come about?
I've always sort of thought it was a neglected topic, especially in fiction. There's a lot out there, but a lot of it isn't that great. Or it's hard to find, or it's old. So yeah, I was just like, they always say, write what you want to read. So that's kind of where I was going by.
Right. It does kind of seem like World War II takes up most of the airspace when it comes to fiction set in worldwide conflicts. But World War I has always been very interesting to me, maybe partly for that reason, because as you say, it does seem somewhat neglected. But there's also, I don't want to say like romanticism, because like war, I guess by nature, is a terrible thing, but there is a romanticism to that time period, not only because of the drama surrounding the conflict, but also because that's such a time in at least when Western civilization, when things were changing so rapidly, like industry and social structure and all that kind of stuff was taking place, and then you have this massive worldwide drama taking place, and again on a world stage, and the stakes didn't get much higher than that for people at that time. And so there's just a lot going on, and I'm kind of surprised. Maybe it's because World War II is more recent, but it always surprises me that with all of the, I want to say, fodder for writers, that there isn't more based on that. So I was happy to see that you were taking that on. Now, what genre would you say that your book fits into?
I class it as just generic historical fiction. It's not really a romance or anything. I wouldn't categorize it as that. I mean, there is a little bit of that, but that's not the gist of the book. It's more about the characters and the history in which they're put into,
Right. Well, I was looking on, your website, and it looks like you did a lot of research for this book. You actually have some historical sources, and I only own one of those books, and so I was like, oh yes, more resources for me to read. I think the one I have is, what is it? Is it Eye Deep in Hell or something like that? About the trench warfare and whatnot.
Great.
What was your favorite source other than Google? Maybe, I don't know.
Well, that one was a really big help because a lot of the war stuff takes place in or around the trenches, and I needed to know what it was like, the practical stuff of what did they eat, how did they get their mail, what did they do with casualties, and all that stuff is addressed in that book, so it was really great. I also read, not really relevant to World War I exactly, but the main character's childhood. I drew a lot from a book called A Childhood in Scotland, which is a short little book, and it's absolutely wonderful. And that book was actually written by a child from the 20s, but her father had been in World War I, and not a whole lot changes when you live in a castle in Scotland from one decade to the next. So I think that I think there was a lot there that I kind of was inspired by for the main character's childhood and
Mhm.
upbringing. Um,
Now, will this be your first book, or have you written others?
it'll be my first published book, yes.
Okay.
I've been writing since I was a teenager, but they were pretty terrible. So,
Yeah, aren't they all? Yeah. I was go I was going back through some of my old stuff the other day. It's been a few weeks now, I guess, and
uh-huh.
rereading some stuff. And I mean, it was great to read it just because you can see how far you've come.
Oh yeah.
And I don't consider myself an A-list writer or anything like that, but to see where I came from, it was encouraging. Like, oh, so I actually have learned something. Yay! Okay, because
Yeah.
sometimes when you're writing, you feel like you're not learning. It's
Uh-huh. Yeah.
the process is so gradual
Mhm.
that it's hard to look back and it's sort of like looking at a picture of your children
Uh-huh.
from long ago. Like, oh wow, they really have grown, but you don't see it because it's so incremental.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So, I'm assuming that being writers that you plan to do more following this one. Do you
Yeah.
plan to continue with the historical fiction?
That is my first love, so yes, probably. I don't really see myself doing much else, at least not with anything I have planned at the moment.
Yeah.
Um, I have uh, middle grade sort of companion book to The War in Our Hearts that I've got to turn in May. It's only it's not at all dependent on the other one. It's just some of the same characters pop up in it. So that one's set in 1925.
Okay.
So
So you progress a little bit then.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So there's
That'll be
that.
interesting to see, especially if you use some few recurring characters, not to make it a series,
Yeah,
but just to
yeah,
have those little ties in to see how the characters have
yeah.
progressed
Uh-huh.
and whatnot. Because I mean, the 20s are also fascinating too. In fact, I'm really interested in anything from like 1900 to 1950.
Yeah,
Anything in there is going to catch my interest.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'd say the 1920s are probably the second most neglected decade. It
I
seems like there's a few things here and there, but a lot of it's like big city or it doesn't deal with like small town ordinary people that maybe weren't in New York City or Chicago during the Prohibition and
right,
stuff
yeah,
like that.
it's all F. Scott Fitzgerald, and that's
Yeah,
pretty much it. Well,
yeah.
why do you think that is? That these two periods that, say, for example, we find so fascinating, and I think a lot more people would, were there more information about them in terms of fiction anyway. Why do you think that is that they're more neglected?
I've thought about that a lot. There's just so much World War II, and a lot of it is great. I love reading about it, and I think maybe it's just because people that's what they're more familiar with.
Yeah.
But then you have like the Vietnam War, the Korean War, and those are more recent, but you're not really seeing anything about them. So I don't think it's a recent issue. So I'm not sure. I have wondered that.
In a way, I almost wonder if World War II is an easier story to tell. I mean, it's kind of tailor made for it. You've got a side that is very easily defined as evil, and then another side that's very easily characterized as good, if you want to look at that. So you've got this classic good and evil, whereas World War One was less so.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly atrocities happen in any war, but it wasn't on this grand genocidal scale that we had in World War II. And so I think sometimes it's more difficult to make a villain out of, like, if one of my favorite books is All Quiet on the Western Front about the
I love
German
that.
soldiers, and
Yeah.
there are fewer, I think, of those about World War II because people would find them more difficult to handle because of just the stereotypical view of a German soldier in World War II, which for the rank and file was, not necessarily the
Yeah.
case, but that's how
Yeah.
people tend to think. So I don't know. I guess that could be part of it, but I don't know. That's a question that has stumped me as well, and I'm always, like I said, I saw when you mentioned that you might be interested in an interview, and I saw World War One, like, oh yeah, because it's more rare to find somebody who cares at all about it, or even knows anything about it, and probably that's why people I don't want to say they don't care, but I don't think they
Hmm.
know enough to comment on it, which I
Yeah,
think is unfortunate. Now your book is in pre-order right now, is that right?
correct. Yeah.
And it comes out on when?
24th of March.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have anything planned? Do you have a book tour? Do you have a blog tour? What kind of promotion are you planning for it?
We were working on trying to get into some indie bookstores and do some things, but I haven't heard back yet if any of that has panned out. I need to do a little homework myself, I guess.
Yeah, no, I mean that is, for a more indie author, that is,
Uh-huh.
marketing is such a difficult thing, and in getting in bookstores, dealing with bookstores can be such a hassle. And
Yeah.
I can see libraries being really interested in what you're offering because it has such a historical basis. There are some hurdles to
Hmm.
leap over libraries as too, but that would be a good outlet too for like go to library talks and provide
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. You could share all that you've learned and whatnot. I think there would be a lot of people. And just to pop back just for a minute, I just had another thought occur to me about World War II. The other thing is that many of us have living relatives who were part of that conflict. That might be part of it too, which
Hmm.
doesn't
That's true.
explain the lack of interest in, say, the Korean War or the Vietnam War, but
Hmm.
one thing I thought of. Talking about writing and publishing, and this would be your first published work, so I'm interested to get your feedback. I'm sure you've been in it long enough to know that there are a lot of ups and downs to it and things that make you frustrated. What's one thing that frustrates you the most, say, about the writing and publishing as an industry?
Mm, well, I guess some of it is you've got to fall in line with every rule.
Yeah.
There's sometimes I like to get a little more creative in the way I put things down on paper, and that doesn't always fly.
Yeah.
so, so there was a bit of interesting discussion about that back and forth. So yeah, overall it's been pretty decent. We didn't have to make any major changes to the plot itself or anything, which is great. So yeah.
And there was a follow up to that too. I was wondering that I don't know if this is exactly what we're talking about, but this is what occurred to me when I was listening to your answer. Was there's I forgot exactly how to phrase it. There's always this tug and pull between giving people something new and giving them something that they're familiar with.
Hmm.
Because a lot of times, say readers, for example, I've found that they're always like, "Oh, we're looking for something new. We want to read something new and fresh." And but then you give them something new and fresh, and then like, "I don't understand it. I don't like it." And so they go back to something they already know, and they're like, "Well, what exactly do you want?" I don't know if that is that at all what you were talking about.
To some extent, I think part of my problem is that a lot of my quirks are from reading too many British books. And I think that if I had a UK publisher, it may not have been an issue.
Yeah,
Um, so I think some of it's just cultural, actually. Since that's what I read so much of, uh, I think it just kind of rubs off.
yeah. No,
And
there are some marked differences between the two. I mean, even not just in like writing or writing styles and whatnot, but I do a lot of work with book covers,
mhm,
and the book covers. So they do different book covers for the UK audience and then they do
mhm,
the US audience because the US audience is more interested in one thing, like
right.
I don't know how to describe it. Kind of like a movie scene on a cover. American audiences like that kind of thing, a lot of drama, whereas UK audiences more of a, I don't know, almost a 20s to 30s look to the covers, more toned
Yeah.
down, more subtle. It's
This is
something that wouldn't disturb you while you were drinking your tea.
I'll buy
So
the UK copy just because I like the cover more
right.
than the US copy. I've
I
done that on multiple occasions.
Yep. I had a friend too that we would write stuff like I don't know, parodies of like PG Woodhouse and whatnot, because we
Oh,
both
uh-huh.
liked British literature and British comedy and whatnot. And then
Hmm.
people would read it who weren't familiar with it or didn't like that sort of thing, and like, A, it's not funny, and B, why? I don't understand why you're doing this. So like,
Yeah.
well, it's not for you then, is it? You uneducated. Anyway.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, as we British, we Anglophiles or can be snobbish types.
Yeah.
Um, does writing as a craft, does that energize you or exhaust you, or a little bit of both?
I'd say both. Um, I actually find the drafting part the worst. Once I have something complete that I can work with, it gets kind of easier for me. Like that's kind of where I am with my current book that I've got to turn in is I've got about half of it written, but I've still got so much research to do and I've got to figure out exactly how I'm going to end the thing. And so it's kind of exhausting right now. But I think once I have an actual full length plot and I know where I'm going with it, I think it's going to get a lot easier in the editing. I like to perfect it after I've got a draft.
So you like the editing process. I have
Yeah.
one of my writing friends, that's his. He loves to tinker. Loves to
Yeah.
tinker, and like, you're gonna have to finish that at some point, dude. It's like, but I need to put in more commas and then go back and take them out the next day.
Uh-huh.
There's a story about Oscar Wilde, and as I'm sure you know, back in that day, there were like patrons of the arts, so that a very talented person, whether a writer, musician, artist, painter, whatever, could find a wealthy patron. They would kind of foot the bill while this person created great works of art, and pretty much all they had to do was be entertaining at dinner parties that would be
Uh-huh.
thrown at the manor. Well,
Uh-huh.
Oscar Wilde was being hosted by this one countess or something or other, and she had guests, and he just disappeared for the day. And when he came back, she's like, "Where were you? I was expecting you to be here and provide witty remarks for my guests." And he's like, "Well, in the morning I went up and worked on a book and I put in a comma." And she's like, "Okay, well, that explains the morning. What about the afternoon?" He's like, "Well, I went back and I took it out again."
Uh-huh.
So that it sort of encapsulates the plight, one of the many plights of the writer, I think.
Yeah.
What's an early experience, thinking back to your earlier years, what's an early experience where you learned that language was more than just, say, words on a page, but learned that they had real power to impact people, to affect change?
That would be hard to say. I mean, I've been reading since I was like 3 or 4. So
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
I've always devoured books. Sometimes I would read books that were way beyond my skill of understanding just to tell people that I'd read them and try to get reactions. I remember reading some Shakespeare when I was 8, and I couldn't make head or tail of what I was reading, but I can read Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, it's beautiful language, whether you know what the hell is going on or not.
Nobody was impressed, but I tried.
You were one of those
Um,
children? Yeah, I've been there.
I was terrible. Yeah, I was terrible. Um, but yeah, I would say probably my late teens, probably around the time I started writing more seriously was when I started to feel more emotionally impacted by books. And I didn't really know how to create that kind of impact myself, but you don't learn if you don't try. So,
Yeah. Well, and I'm a firm believer that one learns to write by reading.
mhm,
I think being a writer is equal parts reading and writing, maybe even heavier on the reading than the writing, to be honest.
mhm,
And
yeah,
it's not so much copying other writers, it's learning the language.
mhm,
Like, I know some writers, and I'm kind of one of them, who may not necessarily be able to sit down and explain like rules of grammar or necessarily how they're doing something, but they
mhm,
have such a good ear for it. It's kind
mhm,
of like having perfect pitch for music. Like
yeah,
you can do certain things without having lessons. I mean, lessons help and they like hone that talent. But there's something there that, and most of the time they've acquired that through a broad reading experience, and exposing themselves to a broad different type of literature. Speaking of which, do you have a home library, or are you like me where books are stacked all over the place? Or
Yeah, I just recently bought another bookshelf because my windowsill was getting really full. I was like, more books?
yeah.
You never look at them. I'm like, yeah, well, maybe when you get rid of your trunk full of cables and connectors and wires and things.
What, another adapter? What is that for?
It's like, doesn't mean anything to me, but it's
Right.
important to you.
Exactly. It was Marie Kondo. She's like the organization
Oh,
guru.
yeah.
And she came. Now apparently she has pushed back on this, and I haven't read the book, so I can't say for sure. But she got a lot of flack on Twitter for saying that all you need are 30 books.
Yeah, I heard a lot of buzz about
I was
that.
like, what? Like, who is this person? Like 30 books. Like, you can get 30 books in a single series.
Yeah.
That's insane. So yeah.
I liked that little cartoon that, oh, what was it? It was some little animation somebody did, or no, I think it was live action, but it was supposed to be Thomas Jefferson, and he's like, you spark joy, and you spark joy, and you spark joy, and he's like, takes this big armful of books, and he's like, you all spark joy, I gotta keep you all. I was just like, that's pretty accurate, that's me.
Right. No, I mean it's funny, but it's funny because it's true. Books, they make me happy, and I think they make a lot of people happy. And if you've got children around, I grew up in a house where books were such a common thing. They were just assumed that they were going to be there, and I know I want my home to be that way, where kids grow up and they're comfortable around books, which may sound like an odd thing, but they know their way around books. They go to the library, they know what section to go to, or stuff like that. Like I was always that kid who would walk out of the library, and the librarians would laugh because I had so many books, So
Yeah, that's me.
yeah.
I homeschool my kids too, so that
Okay.
just adds to the stack
Yeah.
because I bring them like 30 nonfiction books along with their however many other books they can. It's like, okay, you got to help carry them because I can't fit them all in my bag anymore.
Yeah. I would know I was homeschooled, and so there's a
Okay.
common thread for most of the time. So
Yeah,
that's a common thing.
yeah,
It's so funny.
yeah. My husband and I actually both were too. And my
Okay.
mom loves books, so yeah, I've always been surrounded
Yeah,
by.
there's definitely, I mean, there's a natural inclination toward books too, but there's definitely something that you can pass the love of reading, love of books, and certainly at least a respect for books on to your kids. And as far as I'm concerned, that's probably one of the most important, valuable gifts you could ever give
Yeah.
somebody,
Uh-huh.
because it literally opens the world to them, and gives them the key to the world, gives them the key to culture and language and art, and just the entire life experience can be accessed through learning that one skill. And I mean, it's pretty incredible. I did notice that on your website too, that one of your favorite books as a kid was it Trumpet of the Swan?
Yes.
And
Uh-huh.
that was mine. I loved that book so much.
Yeah.
I love Trumpet of the Swan, The Wolves of Willoughby Chase, Chitty
Heard of
Chitty
that.
Bang Bang. That's another one that
Okay.
I really loved. I don't know. There were so many, but it was
Yeah.
that same genre. Like what and during that whole time period, the greatest children's books were written. So it was just amazing.
Yeah.
Let's see. I had something. Were there any authors that obviously you read widely? Were there any authors that you disliked at first but kind of grew into?
Um, I don't think so. Um,
Just love them all equally? That's a valid answer.
Pretty much if I like a book, by an author, I'll generally like their other stuff too. If I don't like a book, that doesn't mean I won't give another one by the same author another chance. Kind of a book by book basis, unless I've read several by the author and I'm just like, yeah, this isn't resonating with me. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's been one, but I can't think of one off the top of my head.
No, that's a tough question to hit somebody with. I should have given you a heads up. The other thing I would think about is there are so, I mean, I've known people who they will not start a book that they will not finish, or I should say, if they start a book, they will make themselves finish it. That's a better way of putting it.
Mm-hmm.
I've never been that person because there are so many books available, and I know that if I live to be 100, I'll never be able to read all the books I want to read, because I mean there are more coming out every year. How in the world could you ever catch up? And so to waste my time on something that I don't even like just seems, I mean, I guess I know why they do it. They don't, they don't want to be a quitter, I suppose. But there are so many options.
I do a lot of my reading via audiobook, and
yes,
if it doesn't grab me within the first 10-15 minutes, and I don't already know that I really like the author, then I'll generally just not bother. If I do know that I've liked other stuff by the author, I'll generally stick with it. But yeah, it's like you said, there's just too much.
Yeah, I mean, yes, which is probably one reason why we as writers, I guess we're always told like to grab your audience within the first 5 pages. So that's about how long you have to grab somebody. Now, I obviously haven't read the book because it's not out yet. I'm looking forward to it. But how do you start out your book?
It starts out with my main character, Captain Graham. His wife is coming to meet him in France to pick up the girl that he's found that needs a home. So it opens with her getting there and he's not there. The girl's not there. She can't figure out where he is. So the first section is basically her trying to figure out what happened to him. I really worried for a while that it wasn't interesting enough, but I've had people tell me they like it, so I guess it mustn't be too terrible.
Yeah. Well, there's an element of mystery then, it sounds like.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's how it starts, and then kind of goes from there. There's kind of like 3 timelines, because there's the wife, the present timeline, there's the recent past timeline that deals with his time in the war, and then there's like the flashback of like his childhood and stuff. One of my better readers was really helpful in getting those all lined up so that they worked.
Oh, very cool.
Because there was, when this reader looked at it at first, it was like there's a big chunk of this here and there's a chunk of this here, and it was fine, but it needed to be rearranged. So,
yeah. Well, that's handy that you had somebody who's willing to do that. Did you say this was like a beta reader of yours or an editor?
Yeah. Just somebody I found on Twitter that offered to read it.
Wow.
I was just like, yeah, sure.
That's awesome. Yeah. There are a lot of people out there who do support, especially the indie writing community, who are just able to be incredibly generous with their time. I've found, which is great, because I mean this is not an easy path to trod, but by any means, and so anybody who comes along is willing to help out is very much appreciated. How do you select the names of your characters?
Well, since I'm writing in a particular historical period, usually I will whatever year my character is born, I'll see what the most common names were and have people pick a number from 1 to 100, and I'll get several options, and then I'll kind of see, does this fit?
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I did for some of them. Some of them, like there's some French characters that I just kind of tried to pick something that sounded nice. There's a character from Shetland, so I just kind of looked at what surnames are most common in Shetland. I think the one I had the most difficulty with was the main character's wife, trying to come up with a name for her. But because it needs to be sort of Frenchy because her mother's French, but not too weird,
Right.
for being in Britain,
Right.
So I ended up naming her Estelle.
Is that Aveline Perot?
That's the girl. That's
Okay.
the teenage girl he finds. Estelle is his wife.
Okay.
So it's French, but not super weird,
Yeah, I mean that's actually smart. Because I've had readers say when they read some books like it was a good book, but every time I came across his name, like I had this like cognitive dissonance where like I don't know how it's pronounced, and then it was like I don't know, like nails on a chalkboard. Like I did,
Yeah.
And I think there are some writers who really enjoy using like odd, offbeat, or like difficult names, and I honestly, in my humble opinion, I think they do the book themselves a disservice. Because some readers like it, but in my personal experience, more of them would prefer to like have a name that captures the flavor of the character and what they're supposed to represent, but it's not insane.
Yeah. One thing I really enjoy about, I don't know if you read Jasper Ford's books, he picks super weird names, but they're not. Most of them are ordinary words that are more like a play on words or a pun. Like he's got one character whose name is Jack Shit, and his half brother is somebody shit house, and then there's that's right. And then Jack Shit's wife, her maiden name is Worthless, so she's Dr. Worthless Shit.
Well, that's just fun right there. Yeah.
It's just, he plays around with that, but then he does throw in like there's some Saint Volks that's like ZVLYX or something really weird that he says how to pronounce it on his website, but I would never have figured it out otherwise.
Right.
It's like just a string of consonants that he came up with.
That's funny. Oh, we have somebody popped into the chat, by the way. Papa Varango, I interviewed him last week, and he just says hi, and he says that our readers make us better writers. I think that's true.
Yeah,
that's true. I think you'll probably find that certainly when after your book releases and you start getting feedback and all that. How are you? Being your first published book, are you excited about? I'm assuming excited about the release. Are you nervous about it, or how are you feeling about it?
I'm not really too worried about it. I know a lot of people are really bothered by anything less than 5 stars, but I'm super sparing with 5-star reviews. So to me, if I give a book 3 stars, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
So I think it's just kind of a matter of interpretation, how you choose to interpret the star rating.
Right.
Like on Goodreads, 3 stars is liked it, and 4 stars is very good, and 5 is it was amazing. So if I reread a book 10 times, it's definitely going to get 5 stars. But,
yeah. Well, and then you're well, speaking of Goodreads, my worst reviews have all been on Goodreads because those people aren't messing around. Those are they're where the real readers hang out.
Yeah.
But back to talking about reviews, though, I actually think that having some reviews that are less than 5 stars looks good for a book, because a lot of times when I see a book that has nothing but 5 stars, I'm a little suspicious.
I'm that way with other products. I mean, if I'm on Amazon and I'm looking at a pair of headphones and everybody's got these 5-star glowing reviews, I get a little bit leery of, I'm not so sure about this.
Yeah, especially when they all say the same thing. Received product, great, worked well. Like there are 5 that say the same thing. Like, something's not right here.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't think I'm really going to be bothered if people don't like the book. If it gets personal and they start attacking me, that's another thing entirely. But that's also not really related to the book. That's their problem. So,
yeah, I mean, that speaks to something they need to work on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there's something odd about the psychology of somebody who feels the need to go online and unload like that. You
Hmm.
know, it's certainly because
Yeah.
they don't even know you. So how
Right.
could they possibly? Yeah. Let's see. What was your hardest scene to write? And
Hmm. Um, it would definitely have to be somewhere in the middle. Because I had the ending written almost first thing. I knew where I was going. So probably the hardest thing was the stuff that led up to it, and um, trying to make it fill it out without padding it pointlessly.
no.
I needed to develop the characters and stuff. I would say the most emotionally difficult thing for me to write was the part where the main characters had eaten and he befriends his dad's just cruel, and he kind of befriends this other father figure who, spoiler alert, he dies. Um, and that was really emotionally difficult for me, because I don't really, I mean, I have a dad, but we're not close. And so I could really resonate with somebody finding somebody who can step in and be a dad. And
Mm-hmm.
um, that's the only part that made me cry while I was writing it. So
Yeah. Well, if
I'm
you
not
make
used
yourself cry, then I think that's, you're doing something right.
to yeah.
It-
None of the rest of it made me cry, but that did. So
Are there any books, and what books that you've read written by other people that have had that same effect on you, that have elicited the tears that have touched you so deeply?
very rarely. I'm usually not a crier. How Green Was My Valley? My friend and I read books aloud to each other over the phone, and I was reading her that one. We got to the end, and I could barely get through it because I was crying so hard. And again, that's a loving father figure death issue.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I cried over when I was a younger teenager. I remember crying a lot over Little Women because doesn't everybody cry when Beth dies? I'm trying to remember what else. Codename Verity made me cry once out of the 10 times I've read it. It wasn't the first time, it was the second time. Um, yeah, I don't cry a lot at books.
Yeah.
Um,
I can only distinctly remember, there may have been others, um, one time.
mhm.
It was the book Martin Eden by Jack London.
Okay, I haven't read that.
Yeah, and it takes us, it's basically a biography, I think semi-autobiographical of London, where it talks about
Oh,
a young man growing up, um, like basically born into nothing, no education at all,
mhm,
and he meets this girl who's from kind of a well-to-do upper class family, and like she basically like educates him, teaches him how to read, and all this
mhm,
stuff. And he goes on, that like lights a fire, like a thirst for knowledge inside him. So he becomes like, he struggles to reach her level in a sense, and he
mhm,
becomes a writer and gets publishing success. But then it kind of traces his downward path as well.
mhm.
And I'm not going to ruin the ending, but it's
Yeah.
at the end he was like, oh, not only did that strike home for me, but it was like kind of because you knew London was in some regard writing about himself
Mhm,
well,
mhm.
and there was just something about that book that really grabbed me. I haven't reread it. I actually wondered if I still have my copy, but I
Yeah.
certainly would. And
Mhm.
yeah, I would be interested to go back because it's been probably 20 years since I've 15 to 20 years since I've read it. So I'd be interested to go back and see if
Yeah.
it's still as
That kind of
powerful as I
reminds me,
remember.
reminds me a little bit of my reaction to Flowers for Algernon, which didn't make me cry, but the ending of that is such a smack in the gut. I remember just going around kind of in shock after
Yeah,
finishing it,
yeah.
for quite a while. Like, man, that was that was definitely something. And
What does it says about us as writers who we would love to have done that to somebody? Oh man, like if somebody says, your book made me cry, like, yes, I'm so happy about that.
There was a meme someone shared recently, and I think I shared it to my Facebook page, where there's like a guy driving a car with his two friends, and the friends are like, "You're such a horrible person. I can't believe you killed him off." And the driver's just got this big grin on his face. Like, yep, that's pretty accurate. I need to craft this maximum emotional devastation because some other author did it to me.
Why do you write? It's to get back at everybody who made me write.
That's it. Yep.
Seems a little extreme, but all right. Oh, well, Eve, it's been great having you on the show. And I really hope everybody will look at your book on March 24th. I'll try to include a link in the description to Amazon. But before you go, I do want to read like the summary of the book, just so people know what to look for. This is taken straight, I think, from your website or from Amazon. Let's see. France, 1916. Estelle Graham faces a nightmare. Expecting to meet her beloved husband and bring their newly adopted daughter home to Scotland, she instead finds him gravely injured and unconscious in a casualty station. As she fights for his care, she takes solace in his journals and letters. In a farmhouse in Somme, Captain Jamie Graham is forever changed when he meets young Aveline Perot, both of them broken, walled off from the cruel and cold world around them, made even crueler and colder by the Great War. I like that line. How you play off the previous words. I like that. The pair form an unlikely bond. She finds in him the father she never had, and with her love, he faces the pain from his own childhood. Discover the depth of love and faith in the face of brutality and neglect as they learn to live while surviving World War I. Did you write the blurb yourself?
I did not.
You didn't? Oh, I love it. Who did it for you?
Either my editor or proofreader. I'm not sure which one. But I was like, yes, please do this so that I don't have to do it.
Well, I don't blame you for that, because I have to tell you, blurb writing is probably my number one hated thing. It is unbelievably hard for a writer to encapsulate their own work like that. It's really
writing a synopsis is bad enough. I can't. Yeah. Sum up your story in 200 words.
Right.
Yeah.
Now give us the title of the book and then the release date once more, if you don't mind.
Okay, yeah. The War in Our Hearts, and it's coming out the 24th of March, so about 30-something days from now. I can't math, I just write.
Soon, though. Soon, people. So keep your eyes out. Eva, thank you so much. We'll talk to you again later. I appreciate you coming on.
Thanks.
All right, we'll see you.
Bye. Okay, bye.